things, and evil is represented by the planet Saturn. We'll get into why later on. So now understand, Saturn was not the only thing worshipped by the Saturnians. They also worshiped the moon. Now, the whole thing is, when the sun sets, when it goes down, way back during ancient times, before electricity, of course, the darkness. You had complete pitch black out there. You had a lot of animals coming out, hunting people, dragging people off to their doom in pitch blackness, pitch dark. It was that evil and terrifying thing if you wasn't in the right place when the sun went down. If you ever drove down, a highway at night or a certain area at night and it's just pitch black outside, without your car lights, you would be in complete darkness. I know a lot of people have, done that before. So imagine back then, or being somewhere like, Africa, or being somewhere where there are wild animals that can, hunt you and kill you at night, and, it's nothing you can do. So at night, it was a terrifying thing. Looking up at the sky, you see the moon, you see the planet Saturn, especially when you're looking at Saturn on an angle and it looks like an eye. So, they associated Saturn with death, with violence. This is why the ancient Egyptians called it the deity Set, because it corresponds with the sun setting. Now, the whole thing is this. I know a lot of people get caught up in names and terminologies. I don't want you to get caught up in this kind of stuff. Yes, sunset would not sound the same in, like Chinese. So the sun setting in Chinese wouldn't equate to the Egyptian god Set. It wouldn't equate. So a lot of people will say, well, it doesn't equate in different languages, so, it doesn't mean anything. It's not about the name and how it sounds. It's about what it represents. It's about what the name corresponds with. Now, the whole thing you have to think about is this. When they created the English language, why did they make these terminologies, equate to certain things, certain biblical things, like Jesus is the sun and our sun. So when we have a sun, it sounds the same as the sun in the sky. So you have to realize, as I said before, the English language was created to go with the Bible. It was made to go with the Bible to deceive you, plain and simple. The same thing with Arabic and Islam. The whole language was created to deceive you, created to go with the doctrine. It's the same thing with Hebrew. The whole language was created to deceive you, to go with the doctrine. Plain and simple. You don't find none of these languages in the ancient world. You don't find them. They was created specifically for these religions. So this is why the names match. So don't get caught up in names or terminologies, really. Just really think about what it represents. So now understand, Saturn used to be closer to Earth. Thousands of years ago, a lot of ancient civilizations, they drew depictions. They talked about Saturn being closer to the planet. Not only being closer to the planet, but also being a sun. A lot of researchers, a lot of scientists have written about Saturn being a sun and Saturn being closer to our planet. Let's take a look at a couple things. In 1944, C.E.R. Bruce wrote, "In fact, it may well be that both Jupiter and Saturn were at one time minor stars, and that their satellite systems were formed as the result of minor or planetary nova outbursts." William Mullen wrote, 1973, Velikovsky had suggested that as a result of disruption, Saturn went through a short nova-like phase in which its light would have obscured everything else visible from Earth. 1977, Eduardo Cardona wrote, "Diodorus Siculus was not the only writer of antiquity who stated that the Babylonians called Saturn the sun star. Hyginus also expressed his opinion that Saturn was called the star of the sun among modern Assyriologists. It seems as if Thompson was one of the first to notice that the Babylonians designated the planet Saturn as Shamash. Yet Shamash, as a cursory glance through any work on Assyrio-Babylonian mythology will show, was very much like the Egyptian Ra, the usual Babylonian name for the sun." Now, 1979, Emanuel Velikovsky wrote, "My conclusion that as a result of its interplay with Jupiter, Saturn became a nova. I found confirmed in many ancient sources in which Saturn is regularly associated with brilliant light." brilliant light. Think about that. Brilliance, illumination, Illuminati. That's why they call it the Illuminati, the illuminated ones. This is where that whole name came from back then, but a lot of people will tell you they have since changed that. Now, it goes on to say, but I was led to this idea, first of all, by a certain clue contained in the biblical account of the deluge. Now, yes, when you read the Bible, when you understand what's going on in that book, the Bible is talking about Saturn a lot. I'm going to show you. We're going to go through that. So now it goes on when we look at other scholars talking about this. 1979, Eduardo Cardona again, he wrote, it is also possible that the planet Saturn was much closer to Earth than it is at present, or that the Earth itself was on an entirely different orbit and at a different distance from the sun than it is now. In fact, we have good reason to believe that during the period of Earth history with which we are concerned, our little world was actually a satellite held in the electromagnetic and or gravitational embrace of the giant planet. So he's basically saying that at some point they believe that Earth was a moon of Saturn. Think about it. Now, Saturn has over 60 moons. When you look at the planet Titan, well, the moon Titan, it looks exactly like Earth. It's supposed to be exactly like Earth. Now, another thing you got to realize, Titan, that's Greek mythology. So like I said, we're going to start finding this a lot. Things that, involve Saturn, we're going to find in Greek mythology. Now, goes on to say here, Immanuel Velikovsky, 1979, it is conceivable that the Earth was at that time a satellite of Saturn, it's a moon, afterwards possibly becoming a satellite of Jupiter. Now, 1979 again, Velikovsky has suggested that many thousands of years ago, but still within human memory, Earth might have been a satellite of Saturn. We are now supposing that the central fire was Saturn, that Earth was in orbit around Saturn and always kept the same face towards Saturn, and that Saturn with Earth revolved around the sun in 1 year. Now, here you have these people, they've been doing the research. I know a lot of people have never heard about this, but when you do the research, you'll see. It's too many people talked about it back then during ancient times about Saturn being, closer to Earth. They worshipped it. They was called the Saturnians. They had, secret societies of worship, and it's found all over the ancient world. We're gonna go and look at a lot of the symbolism, and when you start seeing a lot of the ancient symbolism, you're going to see how it corresponds with modern day religion. You have to understand the worship of Saturn is in all religion. It is everywhere. So basically, back then, today we have Christianity, we have Islam. We have our modern day religions, but back then it was about worshiping Kronos. It was about worshiping Saturn. That was the religion back then. If you go back then, everybody was talking about Saturn. It was talking about the worship of Saturn, and it was worshiping the planet because they can look up and see it. So now we have the worship of the sun, the moon, and Saturn. We can find the worship of all three of these things in modern day religion. In the Bible, we have Jesus the Son, God the Son. Now, in the Torah, we have, of course, the star. That star is talking about Saturn. As a matter of fact, when you look at the word Israel, a lot of you notice already, it's just a breakdown of Isis, which would be the moon, Ra, which would be the sun, and El, which would be Saturn, just another name for Saturn. So Israel is just the worship of all three of these things. When we look at Islam, the crescent moon and the star, that's the moon, and that is Saturn. It's the worship of Saturn. It all goes back. So now when we look in the Bible, when it's talking about people worshiping false idols, they're basically talking about themselves because they were the ones worshiping false idols. But these false idols, when you go through the research and look at some of them, they're talking about either the sun, the moon, or Saturn. So now Acts 7:43, it says, yea, ye took up the tabernacle of Moloch and the star of your god Remphion, figures which ye made to worship them, and I will carry you away beyond Babylon. So now first, who is Moloch? Moloch is a giant bull god. He is the god of material, the god of evil. They used to sacrifice babies, as you can see in the depiction. is to sacrifice babies to this bull god Moloch. Now, a lot of people think that Moloch is the owl that's sitting there in Bohemian Grove, where all the presidents and rich people go and they have the cremation of care and this whole, weird ceremony that they have there. It's a big giant statue of an owl. A lot of people thought that was Moloch, but that's not Moloch. That is Minerva. That is the representation of Minerva. So now when you read the story about Minerva and this whole owl, it all goes back to Roman mythology and the worship of Jupiter. Now the whole story goes that Jupiter married the Titaness Metis and she got pregnant. But there was a prophecy that said that Jupiter would be overthrown by his child. So what he did was he swallowed Metis whole while she was pregnant. And what happened is she started forging these weapons inside of him, and it kind of drove him crazy. Then eventually the Vulcan, the guy, that's another thing we got to look at, Vulcan, just that name alone, we know it goes back to Spock, and it's a whole nother thing about the Vulcans. But this Vulcan, or this dude named Vulcan, he basically splits Jupiter's head open, and out comes the baby, only it's not a baby, it's a full-grown woman, Minerva. Now Minerva, when she comes out, she has these weapons that her mother forged for her inside of Jupiter. So now understand, Minerva is the goddess of wisdom, which is why they use the owl. We know wise is the old owl. There's owl symbolism everywhere. When you look on the $1 bill, you can see that there's an owl over top of the one hidden there. Gotta zoom in, you can see it. But also when you look on the $100 bill of the Confederate money, old Confederacy money, you can find Minerva. She's there. If you look by her foot, you can see the owl. Also, Minerva is on the Medal of Honor, which is the highest military medal you can get. She's on that as well. Now, the patron goddess of many Greek fraternities is Minerva. We know Kappa Kappa Gamma, she's in the logo. When you look at Delta Sigma Theta, she is in the logo. Also, Manly P. Hall, he talked about the new initiates to the third degree of the Bavarian Illuminati. They were called Minerval initiates. They had to wear basically a pendant with an owl on it that symbolized Minerva and symbolized wisdom. Now, when we go back to Moloch and we look at Moloch being this bull god and they sacrifice babies to Moloch, we can also go to Greek mythology. We can look at Kronos, look at Saturn. And Kronos ate babies. We all seen those creepy looking pictures of Kronos eating babies. That story is almost the same as Jupiter. So we have Saturn, we have Jupiter. And the story is basically the same, where Kronos, he had a prophecy that basically his child will overthrow him. And we know Zeus ends up running it all. If you ever played a game, God of War 3 in particular, we talk about Kratos, who basically goes and he wipes out all the Titans and the Greek gods. He defeats Kronos, he defeats Zeus at the end. And basically, when the game is over, the world goes to, us mortals or us regular people. So when you look everywhere, we're talking about the worship of Kronos. We're talking about Greek mythology. We're talking about Saturn. We're talking about all of these things that we can put, and we can trace it all back to, or the symbolism back to, Satan. So you got to understand, it's not Satan. This is all ancient mythology, ancient worship. We're talking about the Saturnians worshiping Kronos and worshiping all of these, planets and different things like Jupiter and Saturn, and none of it has to do with any real being existing that we call Satan. And this is one of the things I want people to take away from this. You got to understand, when you do the research, there is no Satan. And one of the reasons why I had to do this video and put this out so people can understand. Yes, I was there before. I know how it feels that when you're going back and you start doing the research, you keep running into Satan. Gotta keep doing research and understand that this is all mythology. None of this stuff is real, but there's a lot more to Saturn, obviously, and we're gonna get into that. So now let's go back to Acts 7:43 in the Bible when it's talking about the worship of Remphian. When you translate this word, it means Saturn. When you look at the Coptic Bible, the word still translates to Saturn. So here we have the Bible talking about the worship of Saturn, and it's disguised as a different word, Remphian. You got to do research. Now, when we go to Islam, we can see it plain as day, the worship of Saturn. Saturn is called the dark sun, or the black square, or the black sun and the dark square, any way you want to put it. But we can see here what's going on. They are basically worshiping Saturn. That's the cube. Now, we know at the top of Saturn is a hexagram, and from that hexagram, we can get the cube or the square. Now, they are walking around the square, symbolizing the storm that is going around the hexagram or the square of Saturn. Now, do they realize what they are doing? No, because Islam tells you not to do any research and not to basically try to prove your religion true. You have to basically have faith. But truth is truth, and obviously the religion is not based on truth. So now when we start looking at Islam, and we start looking at the logo or the symbol they have there of the crescent moon and the star. Now when you start doing research on moon mythology, you find out about Al-Elah. Now Al-Elah was a moon god. All they did was basically shorten the name to Allah. Now Al-Elah had 3 daughters, Al-Lat, Al-Uzza, and Manat. They were moon goddesses. Now you'll also find the worship of Hubble. Hubble was always depicted with the moon, a crescent moon. You'll also find Baal or Baal, always depicted with the moon and the star. Looks exactly like the Islamic symbol or the Islamic logo. Now also we can find Baal in the Bible, and he is always associated or usually associated with Satan in some way. So now when we start looking at these symbolism, when we start seeing the crescent moon and the star, we can find it so many places, so many civilizations way back in ancient times worshipped and used this logo, the crescent moon and the star. Now, a lot of Muslims will look at this and they'll say, well, they just worship the same God or worship Allah, but by different names. But they don't realize that this was the worship of the moon. It had nothing to do with Islam and their religion. It was the worship of the moon. So now when we look at Judaism, when we go and we start researching the Old Testament, when we start looking at these characters, they all resemble Greek mythological figures. When we look at Eve, we have Pandora. When we look at the whole Noah's Ark story, we have Deucalion and Pharaoh. When we look at Samson, we have Hercules. When we look at God or Jesus, we have Zeus. It's the same. It's all Greek mythology. And we know 1000 BCE, we're talking about Homer wrote about these things 1000 BCE or further back, and we cannot find any Greek writings. You can't find any Hebrew writings anywhere that predates 1000 BCE that's talking about, Noah and talking about Moses and talking about what's in the Torah. You can't find anything that predates Homer's Odyssey or the Iliad. You can't find anything. So they got these things from Greek mythology, plain and simple. Now, you have to realize Greek mythology, the Old Testament, Judaism. Judaism is Greek mythology. Greek mythology is basically hiding and trying to cover up the fact that these people worship Saturn. They worship Kronos. So Judaism is the worship of Saturn. Christianity, the worship of Saturn. Islam, the worship of Saturn. Plain and simple. And what does Saturn correspond with? Satan. So you're talking about all 3 of these major modern religion is in essence worshiping Satan, worshiping Saturn, and a lot of people don't realize it. Now, Revelations 3:9 says, "Behold, I will make them of the synagogue of Satan, which say they are Jews and are not, but do lie. Behold, I will make them to come and worship before thy feet, and to know that I have loved thee." Doesn't get any more clear than that. Synagogue of Satan, because they are worshiping Satan. It says they are liars. They are not Jews. They lie. So now let's go to Revelations 3:12. It says, "Him that overcometh will I make a pillar in the temple of my God, and he shall go no more out. And I will write upon him the name of my God and the name of the city of my God." Think about it. The name of the city of my God, which is New Jerusalem, which cometh down out of heaven from my God, and I will write upon him my new name. It says, the city of my